Thank you very much. Thank you very much, James. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today and indeed to speak to you face to face. I can't believe it's already been a year since I last spoke to those of you that came along last year from my back bedroom in Tunbridge Wells. So I'm going to be speaking to you about Reserves Forces 30, and then you will hear about the Reserves transformation work that's going on within the single services, and hopefully you'll be able to see how that all integrates together into a consistent vision. I'll briefly introduce myself, and then we'll talk about what is the implementation programme for RF30, where it's come from as a reminder, what we're doing as a programme, talk a little bit about how RF30 flows on from FR20, its predecessor, and then our thoughts at this stage on what we think it might mean for you as employers. So I'm Director People Transformation in MOD Head Office, working to General James. And my day job is really about cohering the large amount of people-related change that's going on across defence. And that's the range of projects and programmes that together will modernise and transform how we provide people capabilities and to ensure that we're both fully effective today and also ensuring we've got the right numbers of the right types of people with the right skills in the future. My background, I have been a civil servant now for 27 years, 3.5 years in defence, and I've got a background in major projects and programmes connected with workforce transformations. And I am the SRO for Reserves Forces 30, very ably assisted by Brigadier Hugh, who is also here as my programme director. So, Reserves Forces 30, what are we? So you will be aware, most of you, that the RF30 review has been published. It was published after I last spoke to those of you last year at last year's conference by the former Minister for the Armed Forces, Mark Lancaster. And the review came alongside the government's integrated review and set out, amongst other things, how we need to improve our national resilience and leverage even more the diverse skills and networks that exist in wider society. And I think, as James has already talked about, international events right now, I think, confirm the key strategic drivers for the integrated review, which is that the situation globally is more threatening and complex since the end of the Cold War. And that confirms the critical need for the reserves, because they are a critical component about how we can and will respond. So it's about ensuring that reserves are an essential part of our whole force and not seen as or treated as an add-on. That requires us to think differently about how we use the reserves, and in particular how we unlock the potential that exists in our reservist population. The vision for the RF30 implementation programme is set out below there at the bottom of the slide. And you'll be hearing in a few moments about the work of the individual services and about how that is consistent and an integral part of achieving that vision. So what are we doing? The RF30 independent review made some 18 recommendations under the headings shown here, and we're largely going to be supporting, enabling and facilitating. Some of the recommendations will involve making changes to our people policies to enable what it is that the services would now like to do in terms of their ambition for reserves. And once we're clear about what the detail of that is, we'll take the lead in making some of those changes, speaking to you and reservists along the way to take your views. Other recommendations will require us to facilitate and join up other parts of defence to make sure that they happen. And indeed, a large part of my job and the team's job is about looking across the brownfield site that exists. There's a lot of people-related change already out there, and we need to ensure that all those people-related programmes of change, be they to do with workforce planning, be they to do with creating new skills programmes, be they to do with transforming our recruitment system, they've all got the interests of what we're trying to achieve from the utilisation of the reserves built into their requirements. We're having to sequence activity and prioritise what to get after first in terms of what we do know about, and you'll see that list at the bottom there, ranging from things you might have expected to see in terms of terms and conditions of service, right through to potentially more arcane sounding things, such as our internal funding model for how we actually fund reservist use, in particular for MACA tasks. So, if FR20 was about building the reserve back up, our F30 is about truly integrating them and leveraging the fantastic capability that we've got. And what does this mean in practice? Well, this is where I, in turn, don't want to steal the sandwiches of my colleagues. So I will, in terms of the detail that we do know about, you'll hear shortly from the single services directly. But I think the point I would make here on this slide is that you'll see it's absolutely a range and it's the combination. It will be both for mass informed units right through to how we can access very individual level niche skills that potentially only exist in terms of the access defence has in reserves. What does this mean for employers? And I think this is where I will say I certainly feel there's a little bit of a need for strategic patience. The ambition of RF30 is great, I think, big tick. In terms of the detail of how we're actually going to make it work, I think when I think back to my own training on major project leadership, one of the things I took away was measure twice, cut once. And I think as James has already talked about, the criticality of relationships, I want to make sure that we really understand what we are doing and why we want to make any specific changes so that we do not fall into the trap of the law of unintended consequences. So that's a long way of saying we don't know a lot of that detail just yet, but we are working on it. And we're at the beginning of our conversation with you. I want our approach to be iterative, both in terms of how we have those conversations and indeed the proposals themselves as they begin to form up. We've run some initial focus groups with some of you based on our thinking so far, and as expected, those have proved to be extremely useful. And we've heard back from you on some of the key themes of those conversations. We've heard about how you'd like to talk to us about how we communicate with you. We've heard about how we might collect better information about reservist skills, both those they grow with you in their jobs, but also how can we tell you better about the skills that they acquire with us? How can we have our systems that accredit each other, the skills that our reservists are building? I think there's definitely a win-win here that we can work together on and exploit. I think we need to make sure that the incentives in the system and how those might evolve will continue to work for you and for the reservists themselves and for us, and we'll need to talk about how. We'll want to talk about how we can continue to raise perceptions of the value of reserve service so that reservists are not treated in any way or seen as being an add-on, but they are an increasingly critical component about how we deliver defence outputs. We want to talk to you about predictability, how that can better aid your planning, and we want to talk to you about homeland resilience in particular, and unpack what part we expect reservists to potentially play in that. So I hope that's helpful to give a very quick canter through at defence level. Before hearing some of the single service detail, I want to take this opportunity to say a huge thanks to you, both in terms of your organisations, and I'm sure for many of you personally, for the work that you do in your organisations to continue to be supportive. Please, as James has said, please be honest today. Please be frank. Please tell us about what's working well about this relationship that we should protect and preserve, what's not working so well, and how can we improve things. You are truly our partners, but I feel confident that we can work together to find ways to make our continued support for the amazing group of people that the reservists work. Thank you very much.